Tonight, we will travel back in time, far back, to the world of medieval Europe. But don't worry, there are no wars to fight here, no dark dungeons or frightening battles. This is a different kind of journey, a calm, gentle stroll through daily life, through quiet rooms, through soft whispers of forgotten customs and peculiar details of medieval love, romance, and intimacy. We will explore what intimacy was really like during the Middle Ages, but in a slow, peaceful way, perfect for easing your mind into sleep. So let your breathing slow and your eyelids grow heavier as we begin. In the medieval world, life was slower. The day began with the first rays of sunlight peeking over rolling hills and dense forests. The roosters would crow, the dogs would stir, and the people would rise from their straw-filled mattresses. Bedrooms, if you could call them that, were often shared spaces. Families, even large ones, would sleep in the same room, and sometimes in the same bed. There was no privacy as we know it today. Wooden shutters kept out the cold, but let in little light. The morning air was often damp, the scent of earth mixing with wood smoke. People rose early, tended to their animals, fetched water from wells, and prepared simple breakfasts of bread, cheese, and sometimes thin porridge. The rhythm of life was dictated by the seasons, the position of the sun, and, of course, the church's many bells. In such a world, love and intimacy were shaped by customs far different from our modern ideas. Courtship was often practical. Marriages were frequently arranged, not out of passion but out of convenience, alliances, or property concerns. Especially among the nobility, marriage was a matter of strategy. But beneath those arrangements, people were still people. Young men and women might exchange glances at market fairs or at the weekly church services where the entire community gathered. A simple smile, a lowered gaze, or an exchange of flowers might be enough to hint at affection. In villages, there were May Day dances where ribbons were wound around tall poles and youths would sing and laugh. These moments allowed for playful flirtation under the watchful eyes of chaperones. Now, when it came to intimacy, it was often both simple and complicated. For married couples, the church taught that marital intimacy was for procreation, to bring children into the world. Pleasure was acknowledged, but often spoken of in whispers. Rooms were rarely private. In wealthier homes, perhaps a wooden screen or thick curtains offered some separation, but in most homes, intimacy was shared with the knowledge that others, parents, siblings, servants, might be nearby. Many couples used the nighttime, when the household grew quiet and candles flickered low, to share these private moments. There were no fancy beds, no plush mattresses. Straw-stuffed bedding, rough woolen blankets, and creaky wooden frames were common. The soft rustling of linen nightshirts, the cool air of stone walls, and the gentle creak of timber beams set the scene. In this world, such moments were tender, simple exchanges of affection in the dim light of early medieval rooms. Of course, not all intimacy was within the bonds of marriage. There were secret rendezvous. There were whispered meetings in moonlit gardens, stolen moments behind barns, or quiet strolls into the woods. The Church officially condemned such liaisons, but human nature was, as it always has been, complex. Young lovers might risk scandal for brief moments together. Sometimes these trysts led to secret pregnancies, hurried marriages, or, in worse cases, punishments by local lords or church officials. In towns, especially large ones like London or Paris, brothels existed openly. They were often licensed and taxed by local authorities. The women who worked there led hard lives, but their establishments were part of the city's economic and social fabric. Yet even here, intimacy was not always as harsh as one might imagine. Some brothels offered music, food, and conversation. Patrons might come not only for physical pleasure, but for companionship, laughter, and fleeting moments of human connection. The medieval world was also filled with fascinating beliefs about intimacy. The church had many rules. Certain days of the week were forbidden for marital relations. Lent and holy days required abstinence. Superstitions added even more layers. Some believed that certain positions would determine the gender of a child. Others thought that the moon's phase might influence conception. Medical knowledge, too, was limited but earnest. Medieval physicians and midwives offered strange advice based on humors and astrology. Potions made from herbs like fennel, dill, or sage were thought to influence fertility. These old beliefs were whispered quietly between women, shared by midwives or passed down from mothers to daughters. For the poor, as we've seen, life was simple. Their beds were often shared, with a spouse, children, sometimes even animals that helped warm the home. The straw-stuffed mattresses were laid directly on wooden planks. Blankets were rough and thick, often made of homespun wool. The pillows were lumpy, filled with feathers if one could afford them, or simply stuffed with straw or rags. But for the wealthy, life was a little more elaborate. In noble households, grand wooden bed frames stood tall, often carved with intricate patterns. Heavy curtains hung from the posts, not just for privacy, but to keep out drafts from the cold stone walls. The sheets might be made of soft linen, imported from distant lands. Blankets could be made of fur or fine wool, layered for warmth, and feather beds, a true luxury, cradled the sleeping bodies of lords and ladies. Candles flickered gently, their flames casting soft shadows that danced on the walls as nighttime conversations faded into whispers. Now let us take a moment to imagine what they wore to bed. For most people, nightclothes were simple. Many simply wore the undergarments they had worn during the day, long linen shifts for women, and loose tunics or simple shirts for men. In colder months, they might add an extra layer, perhaps a soft woolen robe or a hooded cap to keep warm. Lords and ladies had finer fabrics. Silk was rare, but when available, it was cherished for its softness against the skin. Linen remained the most common for nightwear, valued for its breathability and comfort. Before bed, people often washed their hands and faces using small ceramic basins filled with cool water. Soap was handmade, scented lightly with herbs like rosemary or lavender. The act of preparing for sleep was slow, ritualistic, calming. Much like we prepare ourselves for rest today, they too sought comfort in routine. The church, as always, was present, even in matters of the bedroom. Priests and bishops offered guidance on what was considered proper between husband and wife. They taught that intimacy should serve procreation above all, but they also recognized it as a bond that strengthened marriages. Certain days were forbidden, Sundays, feast days, periods of fasting such as Lent or Advent. In some regions, as many as half the days of the year were off limits. Despite these strictures, most couples quietly followed their own rhythms, balancing their natural desires with the rules laid before them. Confession was a place where whispered admissions were made, where villagers might nervously share their worries about breaking such rules. The church's presence was like a soft shadow over daily life, constant, but often quietly ignored in the privacy of one's own home. In a world without modern medicine, many relied on ancient knowledge passed down by midwives and herbalists. Contraception was unofficial, often discouraged by religious authorities, but practiced quietly nonetheless. Herbs like pennyroyal, rue, and wild carrot were believed to help prevent pregnancy. Some concoctions were brewed as teas, others applied as poultices or consumed in tiny, bitter doses. Knowledge of such remedies often rested with women, midwives, healers, or older relatives who knew which plants grew in the meadows and forests nearby. In small cottages, by flickering hearth fires, these secrets were whispered softly from one generation to the next, hidden from the ears of church authorities. There was mystery here, a quiet thread of female knowledge winding beneath the strictures of public law. Although often misunderstood today, many medieval towns had public bathhouses where both hygiene and quiet socializing took place. Large wooden tubs were filled with hot water, heated by great fires. Steam filled the air, and the scent of herbs, lavender, mint, rosemary, was added to soothe the skin and spirit. Men and women bathed in shifts, often separately, though in some places mixed bathing occurred, a practice eventually frowned upon by church leaders. Bathhouses were places not just of cleansing, but of quiet conversation. Gossip was exchanged, business was discussed, and sometimes subtle flirtations unfolded beneath the rising steam. In wealthier homes, private baths existed, wooden tubs lined with linen cloth, where servants carried buckets of warm water, carefully heated and poured for their lords and ladies. The soft splashing of water, the crackle of fires, and the gentle hum of voices made these spaces unexpectedly peaceful. When pregnancy did occur, as it often did, it was met with a mixture of joy and concern. Childbirth was dangerous. Many women feared the process, for death in childbirth was tragically common. But before that moment, as the belly grew round, women were cared for gently by other women, mothers, aunts, midwives, and neighbors. They prepared swaddling clothes, herbs for easing labor pains, and special broths to nourish the mother-to-be. Fathers would often stay outside during the birth, waiting anxiously as the midwives worked behind closed doors, guiding the new life into the world. Once the child was born, there was celebration, the quiet joy of a household welcoming new life, under the gentle glow of candlelight and the scent of fresh herbs laid about the room.